The first snow had already touched the peaks when Elias Boone rode down from the high ridge with hunger in his belly and silence in his heart. For 17 years, the mountain had been his only companion, rough winds, pine groves, and the echo of a river that never asked questions. Men in the valley called him the mountain bear, half in jest, half in awe. He had money enough from selling furs and timber, but money meant little when every evening he ate beans alone by a sputtering fire, staring into flames that warmed his hands but never his soul. One day, the loneliness felt heavier than the elk he used to carry on his back. He decided he would pay for someone, anyone, to cook for him through the long, punishing winter. That's when he found her. Her name was Clara Whitmore, a widow whose belly rounded with child, her husband lost to a mine collapse only 3 months before. Elias heard of her while drinking bitter coffee at the trading post, where whispers floated of a young woman with nowhere to go, barely surviving on scraps and sewing work. Elias wasn't a man who cared for stories, but something about the word widow tugged at him. He asked no questions, just offered silver. "She can cook for me," he said gruffly to the innkeeper. "Je pay fair. She needs a roof, I need food." When Clara arrived at his cabin, she was not what Elias expected. He had imagined a frail, desperate girl with downcast eyes, grateful for whatever she was given. Instead, a woman of quiet strength stepped inside, her hands raw from work, her back straight as a pine trunk. Her eyes were not begging, they were tired, yes, but full of an unspoken defiance. Elias showed her the hearth, the cupboards, and the larder stocked with venison and root vegetables. She nodded once, then rolled up her sleeves and began to work without asking permission. The first meal she cooked was stew, rich with herbs she had foraged on her way up. Elias had never tasted anything like it. He ate in silence, his jaw working, and she sat across the table, resting her hands on her belly as though listening for life inside. He thought it strange that she didn't ask him about himself, didn't chatter nervously to fill the quiet. She ate slowly, deliberately, as though each bite was a prayer. Elias found himself watching her more than he watched the fire. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the cabin that had always felt like a cage of wood and stone began to change. Clara opened the shutters to let the morning sun spill in, humming hymns under her breath while she swept. She placed wildflowers in jars, mended his torn shirts, and spoke to her unborn child in soft whispers Elias pretended not to hear. She didn't fear the silence the way others did, she filled it with warmth without ever forcing words into it. One evening, Elias returned from chopping wood to find her sitting by the fire with tears glistening in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, but he had seen. For the first time in years, Elias spoke more than 2 sentences in a row. "You crying, for him? Your husband?" His voice came out rougher than he meant. Clara looked at him, her eyes steady. "I cry because I am afraid. Afraid I won't be enough, for this child, for the world waiting outside." Her hand pressed her belly. "But I keep going. Fear cannot raise a child. Only love can." Something inside Elias shifted that night, though he said nothing. He had always thought survival was built on strength, on how much wood you could split, how many miles you could hike, how many winters you could outlast. But Clara carried a different kind of strength, one that came from a well he had never dared to drink from, grace. The weeks grew harsher as snow piled against the door and the mountains roared with storms. Elias worked harder, chopping and hauling to keep the fire burning, while Clara's belly grew heavier. One night, when the wind shrieked like wolves, Clara gasped, clutching her side. The baby was coming early. Elias froze, terror slicing through him in a way no grizzly or avalanche ever had. He had no wife, no children, no skill with life-giving. But Clara gripped his hand with surprising force. "Don't be afraid," she whispered through the pain. "Just stay with me." For hours, Elias did what he never imagined, fetching water, stoking fires, wiping her brow as she labored. He prayed silently, not knowing to whom, only begging that she and the child would not leave him in this lonely wilderness. When at last the cries of a newborn filled the cabin, Elias felt his knees weaken. Clara cradled her daughter, tears of relief streaming down her face. She looked at Elias and said, "Her name will be Hope." In that moment, Elias realized he had not paid for a cook. He had been given a teacher. Clara taught him that strength was not in walls built high or hearts locked tight, but in gentleness, in sacrifice, in the courage to love despite loss. As the baby curled into Clara's arms, Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest that no fire had ever given him. Throughout the long winter, Elias became more than just the provider of wood and food. It became part of something fragile and sacred. Clara let him hold the child, and the first time tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb, he wept openly for the first time since boyhood. He learned to rock her, to laugh softly so as not to wake her, to carve little wooden toys by the fire. Clara watched him, sometimes with a quiet smile, sometimes with tears she no longer hid. By spring, the valley folk noticed a change in the mountain man. He no longer rode down with only furs and grunts, he came with a baby girl on his arm, speaking with gentleness no one thought him capable of. When asked why, he only said, "Because I found something worth keeping." Elias Boone, once a man who lived only for survival, had discovered something greater than survival. He had discovered grace, grace taught by a widow who came to cook but instead gave him a family, a purpose, a chance to be human again. And when the snow melted and wildflowers spread across the mountain meadow, Elias knew he would never be alone again. For the mountain no longer echoed with emptiness. It rang with laughter, lullabies, and the quiet strength of a woman who showed him that love is the truest kind of survival.